So, I recently did a video showing off one of my CXI keyboard mates. People looked at the switch, this blue thing here. Come on, there we go. And they said, well, golly gee, that looks a lot like an MEI switch. And so I pulled out my croissant saver, my MEI croissant saver, and I looked at it and I said, well, that has a top housing, so obviously they're very different. But I'm a fucking idiot. And once I pulled off the top housing of this thing, which, by the way, just kind of like latches around it's really just a shell, I noticed, hey, those people were right. These switches really are very similar, but they're different in an interesting way that enlightens me. It shows me things about how these switches work. So the CXI variant switch, which I have broken a little bit of a corner off of, as you can see there, very embarrassing. Pain in the ass to remove this one. This switch is interesting. It's tactile, and you can see how that works as I press it. The blue rubber band on one side of it buckles, and it shoots out, and it smacks this, I think it's like kind of a flexible, rubbery, transparent, milky plastic, with a thin coil of like copper spring wire in there. And it resembles, at least sort of to my mind, an Alps spring bridge switch. And that goes to close the gap between two contacty side rail bits. And each of these runs around an entire side of the switch. And so on the side with the rubber band, it only has the rubber band on the one side. That rubber band will shoot out and mush the copper spring wire against the two contacts, and bada bing, bada boom, your switch is actuating. And this works really well when it's installed, but once you uninstall it, because it's held in place by the unsecured rails, oh boy, it is difficult to make sure that it will actually actuate again. I'm thinking I've got about a 75% chance once I reinstall this thing that it'll actually like work properly and not just be held down forever and or never actuate ever. This is, I think, the only time in my life I'm ever going to desolder one of these switches. This was awful. By contrast, though, the one from the croissant saver was a lot easier. It you don't have to worry about the rails coming out of it and having to be realigned because they're held in place. They're like cushioned by the top housing. It does a good job at that. It was also a little bit less frustrating to desolder, I found. I didn't have so many problems with it. Although maybe that's just more experience, but I'm not about to find out. Now, the ones from the Datalux Space Saver, you can see there is no basket full of copper wire in it. Instead, the rubber bands, which are now red and on both sides and somewhat differently shaped, have little black bands on them, which are difficult to make out from the housing material because they're all black. But just trust me, it's there. Hey, if you would please focus, thank you. But when you press it down, it smushes the rubber bands out, and it pushes that conductive black band onto the contacts. And it does it on both sides so that you can make sure that you've got contact. Now, this has less tactility to it because there's less of a catastrophic buckling and more of just a general squish, but it does give it a little bit of tactility. Substantially less than in the blue switch on the CXI keyboard mate, but still tactility. They're both MX mount, of course. And there is something interesting to be said about the blue one. Because it's only got force on the one side, and this blue thing on the one side is doing all of the return force, it's got a bit of a sticky, sluggish feel to it because it's so unbalanced. This red one is substantially less tactile, which is a bummer, but much superior in terms of like return feel. And this does go to explain how that sort of light tactility that these switches sometimes has, where that comes from. That is the sort of semi-buckling. I don't know if there's a proper word for it. All those years of mechanical engineering school, and I got nothing to show for it. It's from that semi-buckling. And I just think that that's all really neat. Also, they have an MX-style center pin thing that a little bit of the slider goes down into. I think that's neat. I can't figure out how to get the slider out. I think I have to like pry these side rails apart, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. That seems risky. So I'm not doing that. I've risked it for the biscuit, and I'm sharing the results I'm willing to get. All of my CXI keyboard mates have all of their switches, and by George, I want them all to work. Fuck's sake. Thank you for listening. I hope that this has been at least vaguely useful or interesting for you. And take care.